This team has no identity. The defensive rating of 102.8 now, it went from 101.8 to 102.8, guys, is the worst in the Ken Palm era for a K-State team. And now it's not even close. The next worst was 2001-2002, which was a 100.3 defensive rating. The identity of Jerome Tang's teams the previous 2 years were they were going to defend the heck out of you. They were top 27, top 25 in defensive rating. This year, they don't even have that to rely on.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another edition of 3MA. I am John Kurtz, joined by Derek Young and Cole Manbeck, entire 3MA crew with you today. And 30-point loss at home. K-State goes down 87-57 to Houston. They're sub 500 on the season. This one's headed in the wrong direction. There is not much good to talk about. So buckle up, grab a glass of Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon or 360 vodka from our friends at Holiday Distillery. If you still have some left, after going through most of it during the game on Saturday. But for real, hey, Chiefs playoff run about to start. K-State women's basketball. You can drink during the women's games. They are awesome. So make sure you have plenty of Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon and 360 vodka on hand for that. I'm going to start the show today, guys, with a tweet that I actually saw. It's just from a random person. In fact, their Twitter name is somebody. So it was in response to Jeff Goodman, who tweeted about the K-State Houston game. He said, Houston just 30-pieced K-State in Manhattan. 6 loss in 7 games for a Wildcat team that's got one of the highest NIL payrolls in the country. Yeah, we know that those tweets are coming all year. And somebody is a Houston fan who replied and said, Houston fan here. We've walloped some teams this year, but Kansas State was by far the team who came across as the least intense. They looked like they had no interest in playing. Weird vibe. And I got to be honest, I read that and I was like, yeah, that checks out. That seems correct based on what I watched in that game. Now, I was not there. Derek, I believe, was the only one of us 3 that was there. No, none of us were there. Okay, well, I don't know, man. It just, the building, understandably, was not super full. Understandably, was not rocking. And this team, I guess I'm starting right in on the effort thing. Jerome Tang seemed to, after the game, think that they did play with good effort. But it did feel like a weird vibe to me where it's kind of just like, I mean, we're, 3 games into the Big 12 season? 4? And it just feels like there's not much give-a-you-know-what left on this team right now. And it just really has me fearing where this thing is going. So I know I'm starting a little bit big picture with it, but if you really want us to break down the minutia of this game, I suppose we can, but these conversations may start to just be more big picture as this season goes along.
What I will say is like that reaction to that response by the Houston fan, I'm sure Cole and you and Cole both will agree, is kind of how I felt about Kansas State the entire season. It's like always wanting something a little bit extra when it comes to intensity and effort because it doesn't look like it's being fully exerted. And quite frankly, I don't know if I'm off here, and you guys can correct me or disagree if you want, but the only 2 games I felt like we've gotten that high-level energy performance from start to finish this year from Kansas State was the first 2 Big 12 games of the year against Cincinnati when they won at home, and then at TCU. The problem at TCU was just the late collapse where he didn't score in the last 3 minutes and 14 seconds. Otherwise, I think it was an effort deserving of a win. You just didn't close the right way, and your offense folds up down the stretch, which is also an unfortunate trend this season and maybe for the Jerome Tang era in general when Marquise Noel is not the one directing everyone on the floor. I agree on the effort thing with that responder from the Houston contingent, and I was a little perplexed as to Jerome Tang's answer regarding effort, not thinking that it was an issue. I think the only defense of that was they almost did kind of fight back there for a moment in the second half when they got it down to, was it 14, 60 to 46, I want to say. But beyond that moment, I didn't think it was an effort that was overwhelming. And the alternative is Jerome Tang saying we could play as hard as we want, as good as we want, in front of a packed house in Rockets Arena, and we're still going to lose. So, I mean, that I don't know, that kind of attitude, that it's a little disheartening to hear that. And also is like, it tells you what he thinks about his team. Maybe that's the most honest he's been, because that's problematic. But like, yeah, I would disagree on the effort part with Coach Tang, to be quite honest. When you get beat 52-18 in the paint, 44-20 on the glass, 47% to 7% in offensive rebounding rate, 20-1 in second chance points, 21-7 in points off turnovers. You allowed 3 different runs of 15-3, 16-2, and 19-3 in the same game in your own building. Effort might be an issue, because if it's not, there's a whole host of other problems, and I imagine it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah, well, the quote, exactly from Frank, our effort was way better. I mean, I hope you all saw that our effort was way better today. That's just how good they are. This wasn't an effort issue. It's just how much better they are at every position. Look, my first reaction to that was I think Jerome Tang has to know it was an effort issue too, right? I mean, John, DY, you guys watched the game. How many times did they pan to the sideline and Jerome Tang is looking like he's trying to implore his guys and motivate them to keep their energy up and play hard? I mean, that's what it looked like the entire game, that he was trying to lift them up, to keep them playing hard. Look, you don't get beat by 30 points by Houston if it's not an effort issue. Houston is great. And the whole approach from Jerome Tang saying he was proud of his guys after the game, that just doesn't sit well with me, because look, here nobody can deny that, like, no one expected to beat Houston in Manhattan. Houston's a far better program, a far better team. Here's the thing, though, about Houston. Like, I went back and looked at all their Big 12 road games that they played in Big 12 play dating back to last year. It's not a huge sample size. It's 11 games. But here it is. They won games by 7, 4, 5, 6, 2, 8, 13 at Oklahoma State earlier this year, and then 30. And they have 3 losses, 1 at KU last year by 13 on the road, by 4 at Iowa State, and by 1 at TCU.
And they don't even have a quad 1 win, or just 1 maybe.
I mean, look, Houston is a great team. I think they played a tremendous schedule. There's no denying anything around that. But their largest margin of victory in a Big 12 road game in their 11 games since joining the league was 13 points, and that was at Oklahoma State. And K-State got destroyed. They got embarrassed. They got beat by 30. And so for Jerome Tang to come into the press conference and say he was proud of his guys, he didn't think effort was an issue. If you're telling me that effort's not an issue and you're proud of them, and a 30-point result is what occurs, then how bad of a team did you put together? I mean, that can't be acceptable.
That's my takeaway. And I guess we'll see how the year proceeds at this point, not necessarily in result, but in how these go. And I know the on-court product is more important than what happens in a press conference room. But, man, like, just striking the right tone, I think, would go a long ways, because to go in there and basically said, throw your hands up in the air, nothing we can do, Houston's just too good for us after losing by 30 at home. I mean, what do you do with that as a fan?
Well, DY and John, the message is just
at some point you be like, this is unacceptable, right?
On Tuesday night at Oklahoma State after the game, Jerome Tang kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, well, look, the goal is to protect home court and steal a couple on the road, right? And I'm paraphrasing. And then they come home, they get beat by 30, and Jerome Tang's like, well, you're not going to beat Houston, like, at home on most nights. I was like, but you just said that the goal was to protect home court. And Jerome Tang said after the KU game, you expect to win 2 years ago. He was going to bring a national championship to Manhattan. And now it's like the standard is like just completely changed just because this team has been so bad. And I think, like, in his mind, the standard is probably still high. It's just that in these press conferences, the message is not hitting home. Like, to your point, DY, at some point, like, he's just got to come out and lay into these guys. You guys remember after the Texas game in Manhattan a couple of years ago, they lost. They blew that, like, 14-point halftime lead. He ripped into them on the post-game press conference, and that was a great team. And maybe he knew that they could.
Maybe that's why.
Take that.
Maybe that's why. 2 things. Yeah. one, he knew they were a great team capable of accomplishing more. And two, he knew that they could take it. This team probably doesn't qualify for either of those points, but and I get it if you don't think that they qualify for either of those points, but man, you got to strike a better tone to your fans, because at some point they are the constituency. The donorship that give you all that money is the constituency, right? That they don't want to hear like, oh, Houston's too good, when, like I said, and I've said this before, and there's nothing wrong with the things that he said in the past 2 years. He talked up a big game about, give me the money, I'll win a national title. Expect to win. Those are the types of things your fans want to hear. It conjures up excitement. It helps fundraise. It gets juice into the fan base. I agree and understand saying those things, but you do have to understand, when you talk that big of a game, when things like this happen and success doesn't follow, there's going to be some resistance and resentment towards those messages or the messenger.
Because at this point, let's call it what it is. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. I'm sorry. You're 2 weeks into conference play, but this is a disaster. Who sees any path to this being anything somewhat productive this year? Like that ship has sailed, and I think that's a part of the issue here, Cole. With like, what do you say? Because you're right. None of this is appeasing anybody in the fan base. I think it really, it's pretty obvious. I don't even know that this is like going out on a limb or anybody needs us to say this, but he's just flailing in the press conferences trying to find something. And I think it's about, how do I keep this roster of hired guns together and playing somewhat hard, not just completely giving up on the season. And so I think that's why you're seeing like just such a yo-yo of different messages that I'm sure he knows. Like, Jerome Tang's a smart guy. He knows that these are inconsistent with each other, and he knows what he said after everybody rushed the floor against Kansas, and when he came on this podcast and said, hey, give us the money, we'll win a national championship. Like, he's well aware of all that stuff. And maybe when it gets later in the season, like, he can start to transition some of the message more to like, hey, we screwed up. Like, this roster was not put together well. Our strategy didn't work. But you can't, it is tough. I guess this is a defense of him in a way, but you're 2 weeks into the Big 12 season. Like, it's January 13th, man. You got a lot of basketball left to play, and you got to have somebody out there on the floor playing, and you hope that it's kind of hard-ish at least. And so I think so much of this is just about, like, he's got to just kind of take the bullets himself from the fans who are going to get mad at literally anything that comes out of his mouth right now, just in an effort to try and somewhat keep this jalopy together when they're going out on the court every week.
I get it. The correct answer and the transparent and honest answer to a lot of these questions in the postgame is, we got the wrong guys, or some of them wrong guys at least. And there's not a fit. There's not a mesh. They don't play together. We put together a group of the wrong guys. Now, maybe some of them are the right guys, but when you have a few of the wrong guys, that's enough to make this thing crater, and it's kind of what we're seeing. I just throwing your hands up and saying, like, you know what I mean? That just rubs me a little the wrong way. Like, I get maybe he can't say we recruited the wrong guys, at least not at this point of the season, to your point, John. But like saying like Houston's too good, like, and just moving the goalpost from week to week. I just want and I saw a press conference last week, and not to compare coaches, because each coach wants to do their own thing. They got to be their own person, a philosophy, whatever. But Paul Mills basically said, we're 10-5. That's not good enough. And at some point, like, something like that would even be a little bit more endearing to the fans, I believe.
Yeah, I think he could deliver a message like that. To John's point, I was thinking about that earlier too. Yeah, he can't just come out and say, he apologize for everything with this team and that it was a disaster. Like, he can't do that until the end of the season.
Right.
That message needs to be delivered, but it needs to happen in March, right? He needs to say that. If this goes to where we think that this goes, when the end of the season rolls around, Jerome Tang will need to acknowledge the failure of this season, and that the staff, a lot of people's money, that not our money, really, but a lot of other people's money that was put into this team, and a ton of resources. And Jerome Tang got a contract extension and a raise this offseason after flirting with Arkansas. And then for this to happen on the heels of that with one of the most expensive rosters in college basketball is not acceptable. And everybody knows that. Jerome Tang has to know this. And so That message needs to come eventually, but I do agree, DY. I think there is probably a path to the message also being that, don't come out and say that you're proud or the effort wasn't a problem after a game or by 30 in Manhattan.
Or that a team's just too good and a 30-point loss was just almost expected.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, I mean, the 6.7% offensive rebounding percentage by K-State Saturday, that was the worst. Let's see, that was the second worst in the Jerome Tang era, I believe. And so only 5.9% in the 90-68 loss at KU last season.
And allowing 52 points in the paint, I believe, is the third highest in program history.
Yeah, fourth highest offensive rebounding percentage allowed by K-State in the Tang era, which goes over 85 games now as well on Saturday. And the other thing I would say about the offensive rebounding percentage by K-State at 6.7%, which is pathetic, is Houston's not even a good defensive rebounding team. They're an elite offensive rebounding team year in and year out, but they were 143rd in the country in defensive rebounding rate at 29.1% heading into Saturday. In terms of allowing an offensive rebounding rate of 29.1%, K-State had 6.7%. So over 22% below the average allowed by Houston. Houston wanted the ball more. They went and got it. Yeah, K-State was in position a lot of times to get a rebound. They just got jumped over. Yes, Houston has great athletes. K-State should have good athletes too, and K-State should go and want the ball as well. This team doesn't have an identity, guys. I wrote about this on patreon.com/3maw, but one of the things with this team is there's no identity. Like you think about the Bob Huggins when he took over and then Frank Martin, we knew those teams were going to play their ass off. They were going to defend. They were going to rebound. That was their identity. Bruce Weber's teams, for the most part, pretty good defensive teams. They were going to get out there and defend. In fact, the 2018-19 season, I think it was that year, they had the third best Ken Palm defensive rating in college basketball that year, and the best in the last 24 years of K-State basketball. Those teams were going to defend, and they were going to play hard for the most part. And yeah, there were some bad seasons mixed in there in Bruce Weber's era, but they had an identity that they were going to play with. This team has no identity. The defensive rating of 102.8 now, it went from 101.8 to 102.8, guys, is the worst in the Ken Palm era for a K-State team. And now it's not even close. The next worst was 2001-2002, which was a 100.3 defensive rating. The identity of Jerome Tang's teams the previous 2 years were they were going to defend the heck out of you. They were top 27, top 25 in defensive rating. This year, they don't even have that to rely on.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that because, yeah, it's crazy when you start looking back to, like, Cole, I haven't been fourth really in my mind to go back to like the Jim Woolridge, Tom Asbury days in a long time. But this team is kind of forcing you to, which is not great. You can still look great, though, in your home field apparel, homefieldapparel.com. Get the best K-State gear around. They've got 50-plus K-State designs. DY, I'm guessing today is Florida. It is the Golfing Gators.
Florida just beat the number one team in the country by 30 points. Todd Golden's got that thing headed in the right direction. And they just came back. I thought they were going to collapse or, have a letdown after that. Then he went back and beat Arkansas on the road.
So he's still coaching, like nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an investigation ongoing, but
okay.
I'm not endorsing his alleged improprieties.
Okay, well, I won't support Florida. Derek will, so he's wearing the...
It's golfing. We're golfing.
The Golfing Gators. All right, if you want to support the Golfing Gators, you can do so at homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code 3MOD24, get 15% off your first order, and you can find that there along with a ton of other great designs. They've got 100-plus teams there. Best place to get college gear. Promo code 3MOD24, 15% off your first order, and we're back in just a moment.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
So a couple of points here, Cole. One is it was such a stark contrast to go from spending a good portion of my afternoon watching Iowa State, Texas Tech, where that game was played, one, at such a high level in general, but also just like effort. Like both of those teams, especially Iowa State, just play with so much effort. Guys are flying on the floor for loose balls all the time. And then you watch K-State Houston and you're just like, yeah, that's what that guy's tweet. That's why I led with that. It was such a stark contrast. And the problem is, when you're talking about, hey, the defensive rating being historically bad, and you're going back, Ken Palm era goes to the Jim Woolridge era. those Jim Woldridge era teams, like they just weren't very talented, but they were given some effort. Woldridge played a million close games. Like those guys were trying, and now you've got a lot of hired guns here, and you just worry about what the effort's going to be the rest of the year.
There's that, and he doesn't know who he can play on a nightly basis. The playing time is, I think someone called it playing time roulette. It's just inconsistent, but he's also getting inconsistent performance every night. So I'll be honest, like they don't know who they can count on yet. And that's clear by the way that they've kind of rotated and made lineups this year, and they're trying to find something that works. And we're sitting here on January 13th, and I think they've failed to find what's going to work. And part of that is probably there might not be anything that's going to work. Now, they'll probably run into a few more wins the rest of the year, but I don't know what it looks like beyond that. But Cole can tackle what you were actually getting into.
1 second, Cole, because let's make this the top storyline by our friends at Alenco, alencohome.com, ALENCO home.com. To get all your home improvement needs taken care of, whether you're in Kansas City, in Manhattan, Northeast Kansas, Alenco has you hooked up, ALENCO home.com. The rest of the year, I get we're only 2 weeks into Big 12 play, but I think anybody who's watched this team can understand why this point comes up here. Like what is like a best case scenario in terms of development? Because what Derek just said is such a good point. Like, the playing time it's been all over the place. It's like Castillo is starting one day, then he's not playing the next. And Ugonna Onyenso is on the bench for 3 straight weeks, and then he's playing an entire second half in Stillwater. Like, what is the path toward getting something out of this season? Because that's a lot of the problem here is when you have so many new players and that a bunch of them are going to transfer again at the end of the year. Like, are there a couple of guys that you can build around and develop? Because even like a Castillo, he's gotten a decent amount of playing time, but not consistent minutes. And like, how do you make sure that you're actually developing him in a productive way toward next year? How do you do it? Like, what does a best case scenario look like?
Yeah, you have to identify the guys that you think that you want back and the guys that have fully bought in and that are putting in the work and the effort behind the scenes in practice. And then on game day, David Castillo has struggled on game day, though the sample size is still relatively small and they haven't given him a ton of time when he is in. He has had some struggles shooting the ball. His offensive rating, I know, is the lowest on the team right now, around the 85 mark. But I think David Castillo is a leader, a future type leader, and a guy that works hard. So I think you start to give more minutes to David Castillo. A guy like Moby who plays hard and plays with effort when he's in. Now, a lot of times he doesn't know what he's doing. But he's a guy that's got 3 years of eligibility left, or 2 years after this. Get him on the court and play him more. You start to send a message to the guys that aren't going to give max effort and cut their minutes. Now Jerome Tang has done that apparently because the rotations are all out of whack again. Buddy Rich doesn't play on Saturday against Houston, and Jerome Tang wouldn't go into an answer as to why that was, but how many times have we seen it to where a guy doesn't play in a game, but will play in the next game, and just constantly sending messages to guys? So, John, the best path forward is to find guys that are willing to play with some effort, that have eligibility remaining, and identify, 3 to 5 guys that you would like to have back that are fully bought in, that you could at least build something around. I think David Castillo is a guy with leadership and tangibles and qualities that you could build something around. And while he's had his struggles this year, I still think he can be a solid player. I think Brendan Hassan plays hard and has a good attitude. He's a little limited, obviously, but I think he's the guy.
I was going to add him because at least he's an offensive threat too. When he's on the court, with the way he can knock down the threes, you got to have somebody that can score the ball. I agree with the whole kind of David Castillo thing. I know it hasn't been pretty, but it's like, if you're not going to win with the other guys, you might as well lose with him. It's almost, I know that sounds terrible, but
the ideal scenario. So, like, guys, look at who they have eligibility left, right? Okay, Ugonna Onyenso. Well, look, I think we can see the writing on the wall where that's probably headed based off the way this season has gone. Doug McDaniel. Like, the best case scenario would honestly be, because Doug does have talent, would be that Doug gets his head on straight and plays with max effort and takes on a leadership role with this team the next 2 months, plays well, and he's a guy that you could bring back because he's got another year of eligibility remaining. Do I see that happening? No. I don't think there's much of a chance of that happening. That would be an ideal scenario, is that Doug McDaniel would be back and would improve his mindset and play with a different set of effort and more focus when he's out there on the court and be the point guard that Drumtang wants, because he does have some talent. Outside of that, I mean, guys that have eligibility remaining: Hassan, Taj Manning, CJ Jones, Buddy Rich, Byfall.
This kind of goes into another point that I made when I was writing, and that he talked about wanting to kind of almost mimic the Houston model. I just haven't seen the steps taken towards that vision yet.
I think that falls under the same kind of category of like, he's got to say something at the press conferences, right? I mean, I think we all know.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. I would love that plan. Let's start taking the steps towards it.
Well, he kind of had that plan when he came in and was like talking about redshirting guys like they did at Baylor, and then very quickly, as the NIL landscape changed, his strategy totally shifted, and they had the success in year one. Strategy totally shifted, and I think it was, in hindsight, pretty short-sighted, and like that's what happened, and everybody knows that, and I think he's smart enough to know, like, he says that in the press conference. I think he understands that he totally shifted his philosophy away from it. The problem is, it's going to take you like 3 years, like minimum, if you are going to go back to that strategy, like, because
they're not in
their high school class that they got right now.
Yeah, I was going to say they're not even currently doing that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend text me during the game Saturday. He's like, I just went and looked at our high school commitment class to make myself feel better. And he's like, I saw 0 commits, and he knew that going in, that there were no commits in there, but was making a joke about it because there wasn't a lot to make him feel better about it. And so, yeah.
And that, to be honest, and not to, sorry for interrupting you, the 0 high school commits wasn't like, to me anyway, wasn't like, oh my God, this is terrible, because best case scenario, they were only going to have to fill 3 or 4 spots, or maybe 5 at the most, because a lot of these guys do have eligibility left. The ones that didn't were Tor, Coleman Hawkins, Max Jones, and I'm missing one.
Yeah, there's a fourth.
Tor, Max, Coleman. I don't know. This is bad podcasting. There is 4, I promise you.
Yes.
So, but and then they added Tyreek Smith, technically the Memphis transfer, to play next year as well. So it's like, man, there wasn't a whole lot of spots to fill. So it's like, yeah, just supplement those spots with maybe multi-year transfers or 1-year transfer. It'd be fine. The other one's David Gasson.
Yeah, the best player on the team.
Yeah. So I was like, you only have 4 or 5 spots to fill. Having 0 high school signees, or maybe 1, if you struck gold when you were chasing top 10 guys, was going to be fine. But now we're a few months removed from me feeling that way. I'm like, man, I don't know who comes back. And some guys will come back. I get it. I just don't know if it's going to be a significant number.
Yeah, I mean, look, so they were really targeting like 1 elite high school recruit in this past recruiting class, right? But then you go back the year before, right? And they signed David Castillo, but they were really only targeting a 2-man high school class, right? I mean, they were looking at Patrick Ngongba as the other guy, and they had no other option.
They must play 1 or 2 other. They did like a Darion Reed that ended up at Alabama.
He's good. Yeah, I think he even took an official visit here, and every time I watch a Bama game, that guy stands out. Man, he's got a bright future. So, I mean, they did target high-profile recruits again in that class, which I love swinging big for the high school guys. But when you only have 1 signee or commit in the past 2 high school classes, going to that Houston model doesn't have really a feasible scenario. So that gets to, what's the solution? There's no way you can do it at this point for next year. And John, we were all texting, and John, I think you said you agreed with this. Like, they probably need to go find some guys who hit the portal who are younger, freshmen, sophomores, have a lot of eligibility left, that were high upside, highly recruited players coming out of high school that maybe didn't get their chance to play a lot because of the portal era at a young age, hit the portal. Think of a Cam Carter type. You mentioned his name. They brought him in after 1 year at Mississippi State. They had familiarity with him. He didn't hardly play at Mississippi State as a freshman. They brought him in, and look what Cam Carter's doing now by the time he's a senior.
Yeah, let me point out, Cole. Cam Carter, I just looked at it yesterday, is averaging 17 points a game on 40% three-point shooting. Like, yeah, it's still basically 1-to-1 assist to turnover, but like, that's the, when we talk about how short-sighted this approach turned out to be, that's a sterling example of it. That's a guy that you took year 1 when you didn't have much to sell out of the portal, who had gone somewhere, didn't do much, and you played a large role in developing him and then just let him walk when, it was going to be a much more reasonable price than a lot of guys on this roster who aren't playing. And he's 17 a game on 40% 3-point shooting and just a playmaking guard.
And I mean,
Also,
Arthur, go ahead, GY.
getting the right guys matters too. Now, obviously, flipping over almost the entire roster year over year, you're going to have some duds. It's not a really sustainable formula. That's why we've had some duds, and that's why they also had a boom in year one because of the Keontae Johnson addition. That's like if that's the life you want to live, turning over your roster year over year that many times in a row, you're going to have one that probably looks outstanding, and you're going to have a few that look completely terrible. So you got to find the middle ground. My thing is like, I also say, like, the guys that you have to get the right guys. Like, it's get the right guys talent wise, but get the right guys for your locker room too, because I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me here. Some of those guys in the locker room are not the right guys.
Well, I'd rather watch a team that maybe is average talent-wise that's going to lay it on the line every night and give max effort, than what I'm watching right now. I went into Saturday just specific to Houston, and I said it on the Discord, guys. I was like, Houston's a terrible matchup for K-State because they play their ass off for 40 minutes a game.
And tough as hell.
Yeah, they're tough, and they will play hard with relentless.
You know who else is just like that? Iowa State.
Yeah, Iowa State. So, and they sure as heck proved it. I mean, in fact, the 7.5 turnover rate forced by K-State on Saturday, Houston had their first turnover with 13 minutes left in the game. It's the lowest in the Tang era by K-State. So they did nothing to make Houston uncomfortable.
Also, if you go 27 minutes straight without forcing a turnover, again, I hate to harp on this, but effort is a problem.
Yeah, you're not making the other team uncomfortable in any way, which means you're not laying it on the line. So that's a problem. In addition to Cam Carter, John, Arthur Kaluma is having a career year, 54% from the floor. He's playing great for Texas, 49% from three, averaging over 8 rebounds per game. And look, I can't claim innocence here because I kind of
at the time I was with their exits as well, but then maybe there's another conversation to have. They're getting
why are they succeeding?
They're maximizing themselves elsewhere, not here.
Well, and Cole, because part of, you brought up, it was a great point that you brought up about, your portal strategy. I mean, it's going to be, they're not going to have the same amount of money, I'm sure, that they had this year. So you're going to have to take chances on guys that are a little lower on the totem pole there. But then at the same time, By Fall how many minutes has By Fall play the entire freaking year? And that's a former McDonald's All-American, highly recruited dude who did nothing his first year. And then you take a chance on him, spend a ton of money to take a chance on him. And is he, I don't know. I mean, that's another one of those guys where I'm like, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes there. I have no idea what his attitude's like or anything like that. But is he really that unplayable here at this point with this team that you can't try to do? I mean, you're punting basically on developing him. So that was a guy that you took with that as the attitude and kind of general vibe. And now this season is imploding. You can't get guys to play with effort. And the best thing you can do is just try to develop people for the future. And he hasn't been on the floor at all. So I don't know. That's just a problem of a symptom of the whole strategy just being a disaster this year.
Yeah. By Fall's played 25 minutes this season. His last appearance in a game, John, was against Longwood in the tournament on November 25th, and it's January 13th. So
I'll defend them a little bit there. I don't think they anticipated playing By Fall a ton this year. I think that was the play all along, personally.
Yeah, I think they probably had it as a developmental year for him to get stronger, get bigger, a guy that was raw, but a McDonald's All-American with talent. And the idea was take a guy like him to develop in a year where they probably wouldn't need him because they had all these other pieces and they were so deep, we thought. But that wasn't the case. So to John's point, what's it hurt to just throw him out there?
Exactly. At some point. But then, but it's the way the season's gone, you're losing buy-in from guys. And so, is he sitting there thinking, well, this is the place I really want to develop, and is he going to come in and play it hard when he gets in there? So I just
we're going to see when that approach strategy twist or change, right? Because I will say this, and I'm not saying I know Coach Tang 100% exactly everything about him, but I think I know some tendencies. And then this is the third year of covering him. What I will say is he goes all out to win, to make it to the NCAA tournament, whatever that goal may be, until it's absolutely off the table. I mean, we saw him imploring a little bit last year towards the end, where it seemed like there was no, option of making it to March. And he, after the Big 12 tournament, he has that whole spiel about why they deserve it. Like, he will fight to make it to the NCAA tournament until it's basically mathematically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say on the high school front, guys, so obviously Buddy Rich is still part of the same, like, as we think back to, like, Jerome Tang's first big high school class he brought in. I mean, obviously Day and RJ, I don't think they were forced out. Correct me if I'm wrong, DY, like, they both kind of just left on their own. Like, the staff wanted Day to stay.
They definitely wanted Day to stay. I can't say one way or the other on RJ. It might have been mutual.
Well, he's redshirting at TCU.
And he's redshirting at TCU, so I'm just saying that was probably a good breakup, so to speak. Buddy's really limited, but he's really, really good at like one or two things, and everything else is kind of all over the place. I know, and basically I think it's once they got Doug and then added a couple other guards like CJ Jones, he was gone, but like keeping Day Ames would have been smart.
Yeah, no, I will say, like, one guy that is not really playing better after leaving is Day Ames. He hasn't been good at Virginia.
Right. But to be honest, like, he was, like, I thought he was at least training to be good under this particular staff.
Yeah. Look, the Virginia situation may not be fair to assess him by, because his head coach left a month before the season, and it's a new program, and now you got a whole new coach. Like, you got a guy that didn't recruit, well, probably recruited him some, but, he didn't sign up to play for. And Day is shooting under 38% from the floor and averaging 6 points a game and only 1.5 assists per game. So, and his minutes have been cut down significantly of late. He's averaging 21 a game. So, yeah, I mean, Day hasn't been like, so that first big high school class, the reason I'm pointing this out is, like, RJ Jones is being redshirted while other freshmen at TCU play. And then Buddy Rich is hardly playing, and it's very sporadic here at K-State. And then Day Ames really hasn't done that well at Virginia. I would have liked to retain Day, but maybe that's why Tang's philosophy changed a little bit. Like, they started targeting, like, these really higher tier, high school guys, because that class that he brought in, most of them left, and they weren't ready to play as freshmen much. So I don't know. I'm just reaching, grasping at something. One thing I will say, go ahead, John.
Well, I'm sure, I think it's pretty obvious that that's why their strategy changed. And you combine that again with the success that they had in year one. And then I think the idea that, like, okay, well, we have all this to sell now, like, and if we can get the financial backing, like, we're good. We can bypass a couple of steps. And I think what's happened is you realize that you really can't. And now it's like, you got to formulate a philosophy and, like, have some gumption to stick to it. That's sort of the problem. It's like they've flirted with a couple different strategies. And like you said, Cole, what's the identity of the team? Well, what's the identity of the program?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the identity of your program?
I've said that. You guys know that. I've kind of harped on that for a few months. Like, have a philosophy, like a core, way you want to build this program, and then do everything in your power to make decisions around that. As much as we don't like some of the things that Chris Kleiman does, it's probably opposite with him. He does a great job of that, and he probably doesn't stray from it enough. And where Tang probably doesn't cling to it enough is what I would say. In fairness, I get that it's a tough job. It's their job to do it, but it is tough. You're basically, this Houston model or some other, or Iowa State model that they're kind of saying, and that would be great to have. It is tough to execute. You're kind of threading the needle because you want to supplement them with 2 or 3 really, really good transfers a year while keeping everyone else on your roster happy enough to stay and comfortable enough in their role to stay. It's a tough needle to thread. And what I would say is, I think that's where they fell this past offseason because I think they were like using this infusion of money that they got because they implored that they could win if they got it. And then they went and grabbed this shiny transfer and that shiny transfer and that shiny transfer. And all of a sudden, the guys that they wanted to stay were kind of looking around like, what about me? And so they leave. Now, you got to be able to get this shiny transfer, that shiny transfer, and not lose these other guys that are starting to wonder, what about me? And I mean, if I had the magic pill or the magic bullet, I'd be a lot more wealthier than I am, but that's the job, and they got to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, Iowa State is kind of a unicorn. The way that they're positioned, with what the price is for their roster and the way they're playing, I think that's a tough one to be, but you gotta build something, man. You got to build something and you got to find some. And so my hope is, I know, again, back to the press conferences, like nobody's happy with what's being said in press conferences and a lot of the Discord conversation, patreon.com/3mog gets frustrated with that sometimes. And like, I get it. I do think we don't truly know like how much, like to me, one of the biggest things will be, and look, everybody who listens to this podcast knows, like we love Jerome Tang, have been very supportive of him. Clearly now we have to be very critical because this is an abject failure and an abject disaster. But this would be my message. Like there's got to be some humility at this point. There's got to be some humility about what happened, and nothing is going to be able to change the way that it needs to without that. And so that is my hope, is that there is humility and a realization of like what went wrong, and we're going to have to kind of tuck our tail between our legs and do this a much different way. We are not going to know that publicly until later in the season because he still has basketball games to go out and coach and play right now. So for now, he's just got to wear it. And with what he says at press conferences and stuff, I'm sure knows he's going to take a lot of the heat and a lot of the bullets now, and have fun with Texas Tech and Kansas this week. Got to go to Kansas on Saturday, boys.
Yeah, two things. One, when a season's going like this, even when Chris Kleiman and the football team lost 3 of their last 4 games, and I'm sure you guys can agree, you're going to get pissed at anything a coach says because you're just pissed, right? Like he could say the right things and you're still going to get pissed off. When you're losing, everything pisses you off. Everything that the coach said is going to piss you off. 2, I'll say 1B, is that Tang probably, let's be honest, can't be completely honest in his press conferences right now because complete honesty would be just absolutely shredding his roster. And to do that on January 13th is not the way to go, just because you have to try to get something out of these guys the final 2 months, as John appropriately laid out, earlier in this podcast. So those things really come to mind for me. And 2 is like, I get that it's real cliche and fun, and I don't know if fun's the right word, but the easy thing to do is just go all pitchfork in the yard and say, everything's on fire, whatever, explosions everywhere. But still, the best route for this Kansas State program is for this coaching staff to figure it out, not for just to give up, because it is what it is at this point. The best route is for these guys to figure it out. And as critical as we have been on this podcast, we're not saying it's impossible for them to figure it out, but they do have to, like John said, probably practice some humility in order to get to that point.
I guess for comparison's sake, guys, I was trying to think about it, like, because there's some people that have tweeted at me like, "Oh, you guys aren't hard enough on Tang," like coming at me like I would, tear Bruce Weber down when he had his struggles, and that is all very true. And I've tried to explain to people that I have changed a little bit in my approach and don't try to go in the whole burn it down mode like I did back then. I've matured a little bit. But there are like a lot of Bruce Weber apologists on my timeline, and that's fine. Like Bruce Weber did a lot of really nice things at Kansas State. And I see those same Bruce Weber apologists guys saying Jerome Tang needs to be fired. And it's year 3. And in Bruce Weber's 3rd year, he went 15-17 and didn't make the NCAA tournament. And so I compare it back kind of to those first 3 years of Bruce Weber. He won the Big 12, right? Look, I think the Elite 8 year with Jerome Tang in year 1 was a hell of a lot of fun. 26-10, the wins that they had. In a tougher Big 12 too. keep in mind than the year K-State won the Big 12 in Bruce Weber's first year. What Jerome Tang did is pretty comparable. I know not a trophy on the case, right, but a pretty damn fun season. The next year, Bruce Weber, 20-13, they get in the NCAA tournament as a 9 seed. I believe they play Kentucky. I was at that game, right? I guess they didn't make the tournament last year, but they were 19-15. They had a lot of top 20 type wins, some fun moments, some very disappointing moments. They needed to make the tournament, but they didn't. And that was certainly disappointing. And now here in third year, compared to Bruce Weber, 15-17, this looks like it's going to go off the tracks more than that one, unfortunately. But it's the third year. It's the third year.
There are real similarities because it was like a Marcus Foster. He had a situation or whether or not like he's the right guy and they had made some mistakes and you know how they built around him and that kind of imploded. That's actually, I had not thought about that. This is great, Cole. Continue. This is a great.
And I was actually worried. I'm probably going to get crushed by some people for trying to compare this.
Some of the extremes are not identical, but the overall gist is, I agree.
The only thing I would say is Bruce, by necessity at that time was sticking to the same kind of philosophy, just recruiting high school kids because the portal wasn't an option like it is now.
Yeah, and the thing that is hard to compare, right, is like millions of dollars are invested in this team, right, comparative to the non-NIL era back then. So this is worse. To be clear, this is far worse this season because of that. I mean, you have one of the highest paid rosters in college basketball, and you've been a complete failure. And so this is a worse situation. But I just say this because it's like people that, defended Bruce Weber all the time, and that's fine. They want Tang out after one disastrous season. And I will say this, I think he is learning, and it is the NIL era, and he will need to adjust. But let's hope that they figure it out and they make changes this offseason that are needed to significantly improve the program and find that identity and move forward. But the pitchforks thing and just burn it down mode with one disaster of a season, I can't get there yet.
Well, and the other thing I would say, Cole, to the Bruce Weber apologist crowd here is okay, this team is 7-8 right now. I mean, we'll see what they get to. If I had to guess right now, probably somewhere around 10 wins this year, 10, 11. Bruce Weber's last 3 years at K-State were 11-21, 9-20, and 14-17. Okay, so I've seen some people out there kind of we never should have fired Bruce kind of thing. And it's guys, remember how bad this is right now. He was 11-21, 9-20, and 14-17 the last 3 years. Okay, you can make points that you're upset right now. You can make points, as we have done throughout this entire podcast, that are all very bad things about how this roster has been constructed and the program and Tang and all of that. Don't be stupid and devalue any of your credibility with those points by saying stuff like that, because that is ridiculous. All right. Bruce had tons of ups and downs, and it was not in an era where the portal was this temptation. And this, as Cole said, as much as you might hate it, the reason this year is a disaster is because of a completely new thing. And so Jerome Tang, this is not something he could have learned in his career before. Scott Drew wasn't teaching him how to deal with this NIL era. He's having to learn on the fly. So just chill out. But nobody wants to hear that. And everybody wants you to engage in rage porn on Twitter. And I'm sorry that we're not doing that. But you can listen to the show and find plenty of legitimate criticism throughout the entire 47 minutes that we've been on.
Disappointment, anger, all plenty understandable emotions regarding this year's team and what they've accomplished up to January 13th. But given that the feasible and realistic options that are on the table, the best alternative, or alternative is not the right word, the best option and the best hope is for these guys to figure it out. There is no other solution. You have to want and you have to need these guys to figure it out. And they'll have a chance to, and we'll see if they do. One last point, and I just thought it interesting, with this whole NIL thing, right? And I know we're getting a little tight on time, but I remember it was over a month ago, and Jerome Tang, I think it was when he was in Kansas City after the Drake game, took an issue with something Fran Fraschilla said on a broadcast about that guy's getting paid a lot of money to make that play. And Tang basically took issue with that, says we can't treat these college kids like that. We don't treat those NBA guys like that. who make even more money. I would argue that there is some that treat those NBA guys like that, but that's another conversation. I think I saw a post-game comment from Tennessee head coach Rick Barnes regarding Chaz Lanier. I guess he made like a really good play. I don't know the entire detail, but he said, I basically went up to him and said, we're paying you to make this play. Like Rick Barnes literally said that to Chaz Lanier. So I guess we're getting two schools of thought. All these coaches trying to navigate this current era when it comes to NIL, when things like, well, we don't need this extra pressure on them because of the money that they are making. That's not necessarily fair or appropriate. Whereas Rick Barnes goes right up to a player and says, we're paying you to do this. Go and do it.
Yeah. Well, if you don't want that extra pressure, don't let your NIL deals get out there publicly. Don't let people know what you're making. It's a lot easier if people don't realize the money that is attached to your name and your profile. And so, unfortunately for Coleman Hawkins, he's had to bear a lot of the brunt of the criticism. And that's because that NIL number is out there. And his agents.
There's other guys on this team not making as much as him, but somewhat.
If you knew what some of them are making,
somewhat close.
There are guys on this team that would take a lot more heat if every single NIL number was out there.
Exactly.
So production of Coleman giving you relative to his number versus the production to some other guys' numbers would,
Yeah, I would say from production to cost, you should not be giving David Gasson or Coleman Hawkins a hard time.
Yeah.
David Gasson should not buy a drink in Manhattan the rest of his life because of what that guy is putting up with and still playing hard and being a very effective player. Not to mention, just being a part of the Elite Eight team. But
go ahead, DY.
I will say, it's almost disheartening for me to see David Gasson at every post-game press conference just absolutely crushed. He came back because he was ready to win a championship. And he's giving it his all, and all these losses are taking a toll on him. It's obvious.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to close with, obviously, as you said, John, we really like the staff. We have good relationships with them, and so it sucks. I like to think that we're pretty balanced on the criticism here and nuanced with the discussion. And I'm probably going to aggravate some people with the Bruce Weber comparison, but I'm just trying to draw some sort of comp to, some of the burn it down messages that I have seen out there. And so I'm sure people will think that's probably annoying that I'm trying to throw Bruce Weber under the bus again. I'm not. He won another Big 12 title after that. That was kind of the point I'm making, is he figured it out and rebounded, obviously, before things fell off the tracks again. And so let's just give it a little more time here and hope it works out. But the season's unacceptable, to be clear.
Yeah, the season's unacceptable. Give it a little bit more time because you really don't have another choice.
Yeah, and they got to make the tournament next year. You can't go 3 straight years without making the tournament. The pressure will be on.
That's what he's had Bruce Weber.
Exactly.
And that's again, a point to the Bruce crowd would just be, I'm looking here, he coached the K-State 10 years. 4 of those years, he was under 500. It was not, it was not like it was all rainbows. This is just what happens. People get mad in the moment, and you think back to the good times, the last guy, and whatever.
That last press conference, notwithstanding that he called on his own after he was fired, but I said it at the time, and obviously that press conference is probably going to ruin this thought process. But I did say at the time, Bruce Weber will be looked about more fondly in the future than he does at this moment, and I think that's already starting to kind of come into picture.
Cole, you don't have a breakdown on Texas Tech for me?
They play hard.
They play hard and together. Yeah.
Yeah, they'll play hard. And
was it Williams? He can really create his own shot.
I mean, Darian Williams is a hell of a player. Relentless, gets after it on the glass for being only 6'6". Elijah Hawkins, a point guard transfer they brought in, and then JT Toppin, who was maybe my favorite guy in the portal that I was hoping K-State could get involved in, the New Mexico transfer, who was a freshman last year. He crushes it on the glass. He's a tremendous player. He's an NBA prospect, and
he got off to a slow start, but he's really finding his groove.
Yeah. So I think they also, McMillan is it McMillan? I can't remember. He's a great 3-point shooter, and so they built a nice roster. Grant McCaslin's done a nice job there. Heartbreaking loss against I wasn't able to watch it because I was at Brody's basketball game Saturday, but yeah. So tough one for Tech, but yeah, they'll come out, they'll lay it on the line, and don't think it will. If K-State presents anything close to what they did Saturday against Houston, they'll get beat by 15 to 20. and the beat will go on.
Here's another thing. We were also encouraged by the Cincinnati game. Cincinnati's 0-4 in the Big 12.
And they scored 40 points against KU.
And a lot of people, including myself, were right about Cincinnati, where everyone was like, oh, they could be really good because they're bringing back their entire team. Okay, John, you're on the same bandwagon. I know Mason and Drew were from KSO. It's like, why does roster continuity is clearly more important? There's a lot of data out there that suggests that, so I'm not harping on it one way or the other. But you can't bring back a 100% same team that was pretty mid, because then you're going to get the same team that's mid. And Dylan Mitchell is just not enough as an additive to really change, the outlook one way or another.
I was hoping Cincinnati was like a top 10 team after we played them. Clearly not the case.
We'll go back to Cole, remember all those points we made where we were like, well, it did take like all the role players having a great game, and Hawkins' job being like at his best, and it was kind of like a best case scenario of what you could get from that team, and it turns out that was a best case scenario of what you can get from this team to beat an 0-4 Big 12 team at home.
And Oklahoma State went and got drilled at Salt Lake.
I still wonder, had they not fallen off the rails at the end of that TCU game and they won that, like, do they go to Stillwater with a different mindset, which is still unacceptable that your mindset changes like that and you clear a loss.
I'm not wrong. They played hard all game against TCU. They didn't score at the end. That's all it was.
Well, they had 18 offensive rebounds and 13 second chance points. That's the reason they lost, and because they missed free throws down the stretch. They just delays, but
Fooling Hawkins or Doug make a front end of a 1-on-1 at the late. It's probably different as well.
They played hard. They played good defense. They had the right mindset in that game. They played 40 minutes with effort, and it was just. And I just wonder, like, if they went 2-0 to start league play, and then maybe they go to Stillwater with a different attitude, and then 3-0. And maybe they're not having a 30-point drubbing against Houston. I don't think they win, but maybe it's like 10, 11. It's respectable. And then you got Tech at home, which is a little more winnable than Houston. Like that TCU game seemed to have crushed them. But again, a veteran team, one loss can't crush you.
You can't,
especially when you're making what you're making.
You can't be so mentally fragile.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good show. Good show, guys. Thanks to our friends at Holiday Distillery. Get your Ben Holiday bottled in bond bourbon and your 360 vodka. Appreciate Home Field Apparel and our friends at Alenco. All your home improvement needs, ALENCO home.com. Thanks to Nick Springer behind the scenes for making this thing happen. For Derek Young and Cole Manbeck, I am John Kurtz. We'll talk to you soon on 3 Mall.